Welcome to Maharat's 10 Days of Torah. I'm Sofia Freudenstein, a soon-to-be second-year student at Yeshiva at Maharat, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about Shavuot, since my undergraduate thesis was about the philosophical problem of obligation at Ma'amad Har Sinai, which is what Shavuot is commemorating. Let's lay out the philosophical problem. You might already be familiar with the Talmudic text from Masechet Shabbat, Daf 88a, based on the Torah's language of revelation at Sinai being described as Vayitziatzvu b'tachtit hahar, literally that Bnei Yisrael stood under the mountain. Rav Avdimi Bar Chama understands this to be a metaphor for how Bnei Yisrael experienced revelation. Instead of being this inspiring and exciting time, it was a time of coercion, in which God forces Bnei Yisrael to follow the commandments literally under the threat of the mountain itself being violently thrust upon them. This causes trouble for Chazal. How can one be obligated by Torah if it has been taken on during a time of duress? Luckily, the Gemara comes up with an answer, suggesting that through an almost midrashic reading of the text, that in a future time of Esther, Bnei Israel took on the Torah then, hundreds of years later. Through this imagery, it seems that Chazal is struggling with a broader question, which is how we relate to how we are obligated in general. What do we owe each other, and why, especially when the source of obligation comes from the past or our ancestors and not us ourselves? This is actually a philosophical issue that came up with the Enlightenment, and not just a Jewish one. How can we be sure of the occurrence and accuracy of previous events, especially ones that provide a basis for our important and ideological and sociological frameworks of today? Even if there was some kind of gained certainty of these events occurring in the past, why does an event in the past have any claim upon us in the present? Tradition passed on from generation to generation became an insufficient answer for belief in the Enlightenment context. For my thesis work, I got to study some really amazing thinkers that rationally grappled with this question. Martin Buber seems to agree with this philosophical critique and says, actually, yes, events in the past are not enough to bind us now, which meant he kind of threw out halacha altogether, at least in the binding sense as understood in Orthodox context today. Franz Rosenzweig seems to suggest that commandments do not entail the same kind of obligation as law, but that we should see Torah that we got at Sinai as something more of a love language between us and God, making the obligation seem less daunting and more similar to what one owes in a romantic relationship. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel suggested that the revelation of Sinai might have happened in the past, but experiences of revelation through the wonder of nature actually happen all the time when we're in the world, maybe like how I am now. So it's not like this Torah only exists in the past, but we're personally being obligated in every moment. These are all very rational answers that fix this problem of obligation, and that's great, sometimes. But there seems to be something missing. This isn't just a theoretical, abstract conversation about what we owe God and vice versa. This is about our lives, how the divine manifests in our daily experience. It might mean needing more than just a theoretical approach to this issue. The philosopher Mara Benjamin seems to pick up on this lack from these philosophers. In her book, The Obligated Self, she talks about how all these philosophers interact with the problem of obligation, but then points out something significant. All of them seem to be treating obligation like it's something dirty. But actually, isn't living in community all about taking on obligations that are thrust upon you? Isn't being a Jew, a family member, a friend, a human being being instilled with charge to take care of our surrounding environment, forced into obligation all the time? She points to her experience of becoming a new mother and how she was immediately obligated to take care of this child. It was something she wanted, but also something that was deeply challenging because it took away her autonomy to some extent. But isn't this a normal experience? We are individuals, but not individuals who are stuck in our own worlds. We constantly live with others and take care of them. Benjamin points out how all of these previous philosophers are so concerned with the Torah looking bad for putting demands upon us, as if this didn't occur in our everyday human experience all the time. The Talmud's description of Har Sinai violently being forced upon us is an important image to grapple with for sure. But there's a difference between being disturbed by this image and then being disturbed with obligation being forced upon us in general. Mara Benjamin, through her real-life examples, reminds us that in many times in life, we are asked to do things of us that we don't fully understand or inconvenience to us. And it is especially interesting to note that Mara Benjamin uses real-life examples to draw out philosophical jargon of obligation and take us out of that, in a way that maybe speaks to us more emotionally as a way to prove her point. For me, it works pretty well. Hopefully, through exploring some of these models of thinking and about how obligation is thrust upon us at Har Sinai, they can each help us in different ways to think about why Torah and halacha are important to us personally, and what our role is in how we practice and implement what was given to us at Revelation at Sinai in the rest of our daily lives. Chag Sameach.